and welcome to episode 7 of Taking Back the Narrative. I am absolutely honored to have back on Aaron Hadida. And Aaron, you need no explanation to many of our viewers, but for those who do, aside from being a super Zionist, Aaron is the Director of Security for Herut Canada. He's also the founder of Jewish Resistance. He has a book out now, which we will gladly get into at the end of the segment. And Aaron also provides high-level security for synagogues basically around the world. So Aaron, thank you so much for coming back. It was such a pleasure talking with you during a previous episode. And so today's episode, it's called Jewish Victimization, How to Prevent It Physically and Spiritually. And so Aaron and I came up with this topic because it's a continuation of our previous episode, which was called Tough Jews, the Real Nature of the Jewish Tribe. So I have a lot of strong opinions on this. I know that you have a lot of strong opinions on this topic, and I think we should just get right into it. Growing up, I always thought Jews were always victims, right? That's what we hear, victims of the Holocaust, victims of the Inquisition, victims of assaults, just victim. It's this multiplication of victimhood. And it wasn't until I dove into Zionism back in 2014. For those who are first-time listeners, I was not a Zionist for actually 20 years, and I just came into the fold. I call myself a born-again Zionist in 2014. And it was only when I started researching the actual history of our people. I mean, of course, aside from the atrocities that happened to us, and even within those realms, like all of the strength that it took, right, to survive those atrocities, all the resistance groups, during World War II, Jews did fight back even during the Inquisition. We had battles against Crusaders, the Battle of Haifa in 1100. It was the Jews and the Muslims that were holding back the Crusaders for over a month. When historians went back to look at the records, they found it was actually mostly Jews who did that. So through my research, I became so proud, and I realized, wait, Jews are actually not these little people. We have strength behind us, right? And, Aaron, you and I were talking off record on this, more and more, how, yes, like physical strength, is important. And that's how Jews have been able to push back in the past, but it's also through spirituality. And I know that, Aaron, you just created a new initiative called Ignite the Night, which I would love for you to get into a little bit later on the segment. But just in general, right now, there's this great conversation happening in the Black community here in America. They're saying, yes, we were slaves for 400 years, then we obtained our freedom. And even that was, of course, a struggle through Jim Crow and civil rights issues. But we need to re-examine right now, do we continue being victims, or are we victors, right, over that slavery? And how do we shed that slave mentality in a way? So my question to you, and I think this is a great topic to debate upon, are we ready to shed our victim mentality? And how do we do that?
I believe that, first of all, it's great to be with you again. I'm happy to be back. I believe that it is high time to shed the victim mentality. I believe that people are ready for it. And I think, it's the Jewish world is primed for it, because everybody hates seeing videos like I saw this morning of a religious Orthodox man getting punched in the face. And, the kid who did it was a little punk. He was nothing. And there was, somebody videotaping it. There was at least 3 other people around him, and nobody did anything. So, if you want to talk about true victim mentality, that's it. They're basically dancing with the devil and then complaining that they're in hell. So if you're going to sit there and watch this happen and then complain that it's happening, I mean, that's just the biggest tragedy of it all. It's actually a sin. Everybody that stood there was performing a sin. You know, in the Torah, it states that we are not allowed to stand over our brother's blood. We are not allowed to. So everybody that stood there and watched was standing over their brother's blood. And it's the same thing that you and I touched upon in our first episode together, when I said, you know, everybody that stands around has means to help, has the means to help, has the ability to help, you know, with anything. Pick up a chair, pick up a stick, pick up a rock, you know, use your fists, use your feet. Listen, you don't have to be a fighter. You don't have to be a trained professional. You just have to be another set of hands that the attacker has to deal with. And the more sets of hands he has to deal with, the less likely he's going to be victorious.
Absolutely agree. And he also mentioned that Stand With Us just showed that assault. And it's a balance, right? Because on the one hand, we don't want to hide that there is anti-Semitic assaults happening, right? Like we don't want to dismiss that completely. But then I personally feel that there are entire organizations that basically profit off of Jewish victimhood, right? Like we were talking a little bit off record about the ADL, right? The American Defamation League. And so all they talk about, and it's also bias reporting too, right? They only talk about, for the most part, neo-Nazi attacks on Jews, completely ignoring anti-Zionist attack on Jews, which is actually the majority of the attacks that are happening currently, and then don't say anything when terrorist attacks are happening in Israel, right? As if Israel is some detached body from Jews in North America, which is ridiculous. On top of that, I don't know if you came across this story I just did maybe a couple of years ago. They issued a worldwide report on anti-Semitism, and they manipulated the data that South Korea, of all places, they discovered was one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world. So the South Korean government sued ADL because they said, you know, first of all, like they didn't translate questions properly to their population. And also when you think of South Korea, what anti-Semitism is happening there. They actually, I believe they teach aspects of the Torah because they value Jews so much. So, you know, you have that, and then you have good organizations too. Like I do admire and respect Combat Anti-Semitism, but I feel like sometimes they delve too much into just this overload of anti-Semitism, right? Like now they have anti-Semite of the day, right? So every time you plug into their account, you know, you're just pounded with anti-Semites. And some of them, you know, yes, like, you know, they're anti-Semitic. Maybe they said something online, but they didn't kill any Jews. They didn't go, you know, any further. And someone said to me, oh, so taking back the narrative, how come you don't talk about anti-Semitism on your own platform? And I said, there's no need to, right? I mean, of course, there are elements of history that happened to us, the obvious that we mentioned before. And, you know, and it says in the title, the British occupation, that was anti-Semitic, the Jordanian occupation, anti-Semitic. But to focus, like so many others do, on anti-Semitism, to me, that's counterproductive, right? I think that we have so much strength within our people that that's the way to combat anti-Semitism, right? To show how because in a way, we're not supposed to be here, right? How many people, save for a few civilizations like the Chinese and the Indians, how many people are still around, right? Most of our contemporaries in the ancient world are no longer here. And given we're such a small population, given that for the most part, we do not intermarry with others, all the atrocities. So on one hand, it's a miracle that we're alive well, and I think the strongest the Jews have ever been, given the history. And on the other hand, it also has to do, like you said, with our collective strength, right, to carry on. So I just, and so what do you think? What do you think about the organizational aspect? Like those who, in a way, profit off of our supposed victim mentality, and on the other hand, just pound it continuously into the Jewish mind that we are.
Look at it's the same thing as sex. Sex sells.
Right.
You know, victimhood, anti-Semitism, it sells. So they sell the hell out of it.
That's
and
it.
and they just sell the living hell out of it. And you know, I'm okay with that. I am okay with it. What I'm not okay with is, what are you doing about it? You want to sell it? No problem. You want to raise awareness by selling it? Perfect. But what are you doing with it afterwards? What are you doing with it after your posts and your lectures and your talks and your videos and your radio podcasts? What are you doing with it? Are you enacting any change? Are you speaking to politicians? Are you trying to add new bills to the law? Are you changing the criminal codes? Are you enforcing the law by having people prosecuted who are perpetrators of these attacks? You know, that's my question to them. I'm not going to bash an organization. What I'm going to bash is their ineffectiveness. If they're not being effective, then what's the point? And my take has always been very simple. At the beginning of the year, when Jewish donors sit down to write checks, rather than continue to write the check and get your tax receipt, why don't you say, what did they accomplish this year? What did they do? What changes have taken effect? Even minute ones, even tiny ones, as long as the ball's moving forward, like I like to say. What have you done in order to achieve that, or get us closer to achieving that? And, you know, for me, that's what it's all about, because without money, they don't work. And so it starts at the donors. So any Jewish donor that's out there should be hearing my voice and should be saying at the beginning of the year, let me talk to the CEO, let me talk to the representatives and find out what exactly they did this year, besides the one bagel luncheon that I attended that patted everybody on the back and said, good job, good job, good job. You know, and honestly, because I am close with a lot of people in some great organizations, and they work their tail off to get things done and make real changes. And the organization that I work with, you know, is not a rich organization, but with what we have, we maximize. We do as much as humanly possible to A, raise awareness, B, affect change in the world, and C, let everybody know that it's okay to be a Zionist and come close to your community, and much, much more. But that's a modest organization. So imagine if we had an endless budget, what we would do. And I mean, you wouldn't see me getting paid a salary of $1 million a year from that budget, because we're not cut that way. And God bless whoever does. I'm not putting them down. Don't get me wrong. They do a lot of really good work, and they work morning to night. They really do. And they're on their computers even at night. So I'm not taking away from that. I'm just saying that I personally have better places to utilize that money, you know, where we can build security teams, where we can, you know, make sure that our community is safe from attacks, where we can have, you know, 24/7 patrols in high risk areas. You know, that's where I would put the money first and foremost. Let's worry about our people being secure, and then we'll talk about the next conversation. And that's why when you touched upon people excluding Israel from the dialogue, they exclude Israel from the dialogue because Israel's a strong nation. And Israel's response to a terrorist attack is the IDF goes in and levels the place. So you can't mess with that. So that's not a fun story for them to tell. You know, oh, the IDF went in and leveled 3 more houses and got rid of the terrorists. That's not a fun story.
Exactly.
You know,
it messes with their narrative in a way.
Correct. So a strong Jew is not something people expect to see in this world. Whenever I'm with a group of guys who all look like me, and we tell somebody that we're Jewish, they're floored. They can't believe it. And they're like, you guys are Jewish? Yeah, it happens. It exists. Yes.
Right.
So, I mean, and like I touched on in the last podcast, some of my friends are professional fighters, and like, try and like get close to one of these guys. These are Jews. These are strong Jews that have amazing values and love Israel and love our community. And yes, we exist out there, and I've gone, all over the place, all over the world, North America, with friends who at the drop of a hat, when we were needed somewhere, said, okay, let's go. They didn't say, well, I have a job, I got to work, I got a business. They were like, okay, let's do it. Our community needs us. We're out. Let's go. And those are the types of people that, I like to associate with. And the organizations, I think, again, most of them do very, very credible, good work. And I applaud that. My only question to them, to some of them, is what are you doing after? What are you doing about it? What changes have you made this year? You have a year, you have 12 months starting today. Let's talk next year at this time, and then let's review what's been done.
That's such a powerful point you make, because I remember in 2019 here in New York City, oh my gosh, it was the height of anti-Semitic assaults. Like every single day you turn on the news or, read online, another Hasidic Jew got assaulted in Brooklyn. Even in Manhattan, it was happening. And it was, I'm not religious, I don't wear anything religious that could identify me as being Jewish. But even I was afraid, at times, because I was hearing cab drivers were kicking out Jewish passengers, left and right, and it was happening. And so I had attended no less than 6 anti-Semitic symposiums that all these organizations were putting on, right? Because, I wanted to be plugged into the conversation. And like you said, they all were talking about anti-Semitism. None of them were acting against anti-Semitism in a credible fashion like you are, within your organization. And so it's time to have that conversation, because, I think a lot of, and I'm not saying all Jews, but a lot of the conversations I hear amongst Jews is, either you are, either you're religious or you are a strong Jew physically. Like, it's very rare that we hear the melding of both. And so you are the perfect example, even to a much lesser degree. I am too. I grew up, practicing karate. I grew up with parents from the former Soviet Union where, they couldn't have any guns, back in, Jews couldn't have, well, no one could have guns under a communist regime. So it was important for especially Jewish men in the former USSR to be physically strong. Right, like my father, he trained since he was a young boy. He looks like you, in terms of strength, and all of his Jewish friends did too. Even my mom, she was involved in sports. And so here, I'm a first generation American. It was not even an option. Like, as soon as I was 5 years old, my parents enrolled me in all types of sports. Being a woman, being a girl, especially, they said you're going to do martial arts. Were there times I didn't want to do it and I wanted to do, I don't know, go do something more a little girly with my friends, of course, but they said, no, not only are you a girl, you need to learn how to protect yourself, but you're also Jewish. And that's, I already started making that connection, right? So I didn't even know that I was Jewish until I was 7 years old. But then later when I found out, and they would tell me kind of random Saturday, like, oh, you can't sleep in, you have to go to karate because we want to make sure you can protect yourself when you're older, because you never know what's going to happen in this world. And what I really appreciate through your, budding organization initiative, Ignite the Light, is that it provides the spiritual aspect, but then you also have, the Krav Maga classes behind it that you offer to Jews. So in your way, how do you meld both, right? So you have that physical and that spiritual side to combat. Jewish
it's simple. It's simple. It's light to ignite. And so basically the way I thought about it is initially, when we train anybody, when anybody in this world trains in any type of self-defense, physicality and spirituality go hand in hand. The mind has to be just as tough as the body. And so it's the same for us. If we don't have a spiritual connection, then we're just, basically walking around pounds of flesh. And so Light to Ignite started actually a long time ago. So, my working partner and my close little friend that I love, Lauren Isaacs, she stayed with me for several weeks at the house while I was keeping an eye on her when she was doing some events. And she was lighting the Shabbat candles every Friday. And, when she left a box of Shabbat candles. And so the following Shabbat that she wasn't here, I was like, it's weird that the candles aren't lit. So I started lighting them. And I saw how amazing it made me feel and how it just felt like it connected me to our community around the world. Because at that moment, everybody is lighting Shabbat candles. We're all doing it at the exact same time, in the same time zones, of course, but we're all doing it at the same time. So, I mean, how amazing is that to be connected to everybody? And so I started promoting that to my friends who I knew never lit their Shabbat candles. And they started doing it. They're like, dude, this is amazing. I love doing this. I feel like I'm actually accomplishing something every week. And I feel like, I'm connecting to my heritage once a week. And so I decided to go global with the initiative. And, Lauren and I, worked on it together with Hirut, and we launched it. We still have a lot of marketing to do, and we obviously still have to get the word out there, but I think it's very important. And the best part about it is it's something that takes literally 10 seconds a week to do. And it's so easy to do, but it makes such an impact on your Shabbat and your whole week. So what I mean by that is, so when I started lighting the Shabbat candles, listen, I grew up, in a religious home. It was done every week regardless. But when I started doing it, I started thinking afterwards, like, okay, well, now I have to have a nice dinner for Shabbat. So now I'm like cooking for Shabbat so that I can light the candles and have my Shabbat dinner. And then after that was born, it was like, okay, well, if I'm going to have a dinner and light the candles, and I need to do the Kiddush and I need to pray with the bread. So it just morphed into this ritual that I've been practicing for a long time now. And I'm, promoting it to get other people to do it. So I just find that it's spiritually, if you're connected, physically, if you're trained, I believe that's the perfect combination in this world.
So it looks like I'm your target audience. I grew up very secular. I lit my first Shabbat candle through Chabad only when I was an adult. And even then, I'm the type of person, like, I'll stand back, I'll let all the other women go in front of me. And also I'm kind of afraid because whenever I try to light the candle, I feel like the fire races up my arm. So if there are any tutorial videos, because, and it's embarrassing too, because, when you go to, and Chabad is so welcoming, I love them. But, like, here you have women who do this every single week, and I'll go to a few Shabbat dinners a year. And so I feel embarrassed, even though they don't make me feel bad, but I myself, feel embarrassed. So it's having that confidence even to light those candles. So when you told me about your initiative, Light to Ignite, I said to myself, okay, I want to find out more and I will gladly participate. So any helpful tips you have to those who don't light Shabbat candles regularly? We definitely
absolutely. So they don't have to be big Shabbat candles. They can be little tea light candles, and use a barbecue lighter so you're nowhere near the flame.
Yeah, that I can do. It's the lighting. My mom makes fun of me because obviously she's old school, so she can light any candle, using the matches. For some reason, it never works for me. So if anyone else is having trouble with that, then it's good to know that we have Aaron's stamp of approval, that as long as they get lit, it doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter. Just light the candles, have 2 candles lit in your home, and I promise you, you'll be calling me on Monday and you'll say, this was an incredible experience for me. It truly is, highly spiritual, because it brings back your childhood. It brings back every time our mothers stood there and did it. Every time our sisters stood there and did it. It brings it all back. And in that moment, that's what you're focused on. You're focused on your history, and you're focused on your past and your present and your future. And you're asking God to help you in the future, and keep you healthy and keep you strong. I mean, that's what I ask him for every day, is for health and strength, and to be able to continue to do the work that I do. And I always say, in any interviews or whatever, I'll always say, when they say, how long do you think you can do this for? And I'll say, as long as God gives me the strength. I'm not going to stop if I'm strong. And as long as I'm strong, I'm going to continue to do it.
You bring up such a great point. So, when you said that it brings back childhood memories. So I don't have childhood memories of anything Jewish, but when I do, when I am at Chabad, at least like physically there, and I participate in Shabbat, to me, it's melding the broken links, right? So even though my parents' generation, and unfortunately for most of my grandparents' life, they couldn't do it living where they lived, but my great grandparents on both sides were Orthodox Jews practicing. And so I know that they were lighting Shabbat candles, they were observing Shabbat fully, and generations back, right? So it's so, I feel that power, like you said, that, I feel so connected, and continuing, even though we had that broken time period, continuing those thousands of years tradition. So thank you again. We'll post the link to your very important initiative. And so now I just want to pivot a little bit to the role of government, right? Because I think a lot of Jews, at least I want to speak for American Jews, they want to leave protection of Jews to the government, right? So how much is the government obligated to get involved? And from what I saw, right, because on one hand, we can talk about the weak district attorneys here in New York, obviously in California, bail reform is out of control, right? So someone can get arrested for assaulting a Jew, they're out the next day, no bail. We see that happening all the time. On the other hand, we see where it's been helpful, right? So President Trump, he passed Title VI. And how was that important for those who don't know? So what it did before, you could only, let's say you're a college student, right? And so there are so many anti-Semitic attacks there. You could only sue the university, go after the university, if it was considered to be anti-Semitic under religious law. So what Title VI did, it changed it from only religious to racial, right? It classified Jews as a race, which we are. So if someone attacks someone for being pro-Israel, for example, right, that's against our homeland, that's against Jews as a race, it expanded so much protection across the board. And of course, there were liberal Jews who bellied that fact, and they said, the Trump administration are being Nazis because they're classifying as a race, and they don't understand. So the Nazis were right that Jews are a race. What they were obviously evilly wrong about is that Jews are an inferior race. That was the whole issue, during cemented the Holocaust. But overall, there's been great improvements, because now, these Jewish students have so much broader protection. And then you have the local, Jewish efforts, like you have Shomrim, and you can talk more if they have an equivalent of that up in Canada. But I know, here in Brooklyn, there are so many videos that show, a Jewish person is assaulted, Shomrim is on the scene, and they are actually holding down the criminal physically until the local police precinct gets there. So, and they work hand in hand with the with local police departments. So what do you think about government role, and then having that added Jewish Shomrim type protections, and how that all comes to play?
So look at the government will prosecute a criminal when one is in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be related to a district attorney in the US. And you know, I've called her on a few things in her area. And the problems we've always run into were the victim doesn't report it.
Are they not reporting it out of embarrassment or because they know that nothing's going to happen?
I mean, I would say it's out of fear and embarrassment. I would say it's, you know, that same old mentality, keep your head down and just keep walking, take your lumps and go, you know, be more careful next time rather than stand up and fight. And I know this particular district attorney would prosecute the living heck out of whoever the perpetrator was. You know, she would love nothing more than to have her day in court with that person who victimized somebody. But she's not afforded that, you know, opportunity because the victim is not reporting it. So in one case, I actually had to call the perpetrator's company and say, listen, this guy's working on your behalf, on your time. This is what he's doing. I'm demanding he be fired today before I make your company very public in a negative way. And the owner, to his credit, was like, Aaron, it's done. I'm calling him right now. Do you want to hold? We don't accept this kind of behavior. This is not us. This is not what we promote. And he got rid of him immediately. And I'm telling you, like, but I wish that a victim had come forward so that this person could have prosecuted. And you know, the government's role is absolutely something that they will uphold, but they have to be in front of the person. So the victims out there have to report these things, you know, and I mean, listen, I'm a little bit different. I'm okay if they report it to, you know, us because we'll deal with it. You know, we're
more effectively also.
Well, you know, I got a call 2 nights ago, late at night from a woman whose daughter's attending university, and 2 anti-Israel students were bullying her and are bullying her. And they're saying things, you know, that are just vile to her. And I'm not going to even justify repeating them. But the woman asked me, you know, what can we do? And I said, you know, I will call the dean and I will have a meeting and, you know, we'll get it done. And I scheduled a meeting for next week. And, you know, I'll give them the opportunity to deal with it. And hopefully it will get dealt with. Barring that, you know, we'll see what happens. But we've got a close eye on it now. And we're going to ensure that something is done so that, you know, this student who just wants to learn can learn. The same way these 2 girls want to learn, can learn because nobody's bullying them. You know, sometimes it's about turning the tables on the bullies. You know, it's about showing them what being a victim feels like. And in however capacity you do that. You know, there's many different capacities in achieving that, but that's what it's all about. And so I believe, yes, the government will do their job if you let them, if you put it in front of them, if you know, the victims come forward. Because I guarantee you the man who was attacked today, you know, he's not going to the police station. He's not going to any groups like us and saying, hey, this is what happened. He went home, he put a, you know, ice pack on his face, and he's trying to forget that it happened. And the cowards that stood around him and watched it, I hope they never forget what happened. Because, you know, they are worse than the perpetrator in my eyes.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. And of course, you have much more on experience. But in terms of not being prosecuted, so I think that it comes down to some of these Jews who are being assaulted. Maybe they're not coming forward, at least here in New York City, because they see that every time Jews come forward, their attacker gets set free the next morning, if not hours later. And so I'm talking about those who actually do report, who do take that extra step. They never have justice, right?
Okay, so you're right.
Something horrific happens. And
You're
so
right.
here, what it comes down to, it's in the liberal states, California, New York, Michigan now. It's these district attorneys, right? You know, you have our mayor, the crime is surging here in New York City, and the mayor actually, I think, has the power to fire the DA, or at least the governor does. The governor here is Democrat. The mayor is Democrat. The DA is basically a socialist, and he has unchecked power. And that's why crime is surging here, and Jews always get the brunt of it whenever crime surges.
So I believe you're right. It's twofold though.
Right.
So it's what I was talking about is the victim has to go and report it.
Exactly.
Now,
Yeah.
the second step is absolutely we as a community have to force them to do their job. And we have done that many, many times. But I agree with you. They take it lightly because they don't want to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. You know, charging somebody with a hate associated assault is a very taboo area. You know, it's something that's extremely taboo to them, especially where it concerns the Jewish community. You know, if it concerned some other community, they'd be up in arms immediately. But that goes to exactly what you said. Liberal governments and their constituents are a bigger number than the Jewish population.
And many of them are Jews themselves, right?
Right,
So
right. Sadly.
And like you said too, so I don't know how many of our listeners today heard the horrific news about the French Jewish young man who got brutally murdered, Aaron Hadida, by his Muslim roomie. It was like a week ago, and many of us are just hearing about it now. The French government is virtually silent on it. How many other French Jews are, you know, their attackers never, you know, saw justice? There was that elderly woman, her name escapes me right now, but what was it, like a couple years ago? And they said like her murderer was high on drugs and not competent to stand trial. And so I lost count of how many Muslims have just been killing Jews without consequences in France. Meanwhile, to juxtapose that, the IDF, you know, can push a terrorist and it's world news. A Jew being killed, you know, like a week ago, only now, like, is it, and it's only getting more press here within the Jewish publications than it has in actual French publications. So that's something else, right? So on one hand, you're right, you know, like we need to stand up more, but then the government needs to just have more strength to go after, you know, those who assault Jews, just like they would after those who assault Asians, after those who assault any other community. And I applaud them for going after those who assault Asian. You know, I've seen it myself. Like I saw an assault even before the pandemic, before all of that escalated. And I said something. It was a school trip, and it was a little boy. I'm not going to mention his ethnicity, and he was just going after his Asian classmate, who happened to be a girl. I had been running an errand. I didn't need to do anything, but I did, right? Even though no one there was Jewish, but what I saw was just so wrong. And so I stepped in, right? And the teacher said to me, because it was a class trip, and the teacher said to me, "Thank you so much," because I, under the school district, cannot say anything. And that's sad, right? So it's incumbent upon ourselves, like you said, but
we have more power. We have more power than that, because it's step one is the victims have to report it. Step two is they have to do something about it. And if they don't do anything about it, guess what? We are the people. We are the people who elect you. We are the people who may not re-elect you. And these are things that we have to understand. The people have the power. The power of the vote is extremely, extremely important. And all of these people we're talking about and talking to have to become reelected. And every politician, every DA, everybody wants to be reassigned, reelected. They don't want to just end their career. They don't want to finish and have to do something else. So if they don't do their job, we hold them to task, period.
I think
it's all about a tough mindset, right? You know what I mean? It's a tough mindset globally in everything we do. You have to take that stance.
And I think here in New York City, like I'll just speak to it from a very local perspective. It's that, well, and also countrywide, right? So majority of the Jews here are not religious. So when you hear of religious Jews being assaulted, like maybe you hear it once and it shocks you, you hear the 40th, 50th time, you start glossing over. It's part of the crime statistics. And I feel like a lot of Jews, and I myself was amongst that demographic, right? Just like, oh, well, I'm not religious, so it doesn't concern me. And so the way that a lot of Jews vote, because they're not religious, they'll vote for officials who are basically, they don't have interests of Jewish safety in mind, because it's kind of like how they feel about Israel, many of them, right? Like it's over there, right? So like, I'm not religious, I'm never going to be subject to assault, for the most part. So why would I care? So I think and I know that, every Jew needs to start caring, because we're all one people. And it's also having that mindset that we're not a religion, right? Like, we have religion, we have, a common faith, but we're one people. So it's, and again, like I needed that switch also, like, growing up, I didn't understand that I was part of a people. I just thought, oh, well, I think I'm Jewish. What does that mean? I'm not religious. Israel's the home of the religious Jews. I'm not, it was a lot of those difficult questions that I had to come to terms with, that all came together once I became a Zionist. And it's just understanding for Jews here, we're part of one people. So when one of your people gets killed in France, or one of your people gets, assaulted by terrorists in Israel, or something happens in New York, and you live in California, or you live in Texas, that should affect you no matter what. Because
listen, I agree 100%. I'm on that team for sure, because we are one nation, and what happens to one happens to all. And I feel the effects of every Jew that is attacked out there. And I also feel the victories every time we're victorious. And we are one people. That's the bottom line. And everybody has to understand that. And that, left-leaning, politically left-leaning Jew right now that may or may not be watching this, saying to himself, well, I don't care. It's not me. I don't have to deal with it. I think he has to rethink his or her philosophy, because honestly, you're still a Jew. And by extension, when the haters of the world come and try to attack the Jews, they're not going to say, well, oh, this one wasn't very active, and this one was, left leaning, and this one gave money to wherever, so we can spare him. Doesn't work that way. They paint you with the same brush. So you might as well get behind your community, admit the fact that you're a Zionist, or if you feel you're not a Zionist, you just have a real short memory, and just call it a day and come into your community and help, because we need the help. We desperately need the help.
Absolutely. Because, I've got into the line, the line den online, and, I've seen the anti-Jewish commentary. No one cares how religious Jews are. They just hate Jews, period.
Right.
Like, we're a Jew, die, like we just hate you. So speaking of that, right? So speaking of Israel, and that's obviously our homeland. What role, if any, do you think that Israel has in teaching the diaspora Jews about shedding the victim mentality, becoming stronger Jews in all capacities?
Very simple. All you have to do is look at the way they train their soldiers. Mm-hmm. That's all you have to do. Every soldier has an amazing, huge heart. Every soldier, has incredible training. And They're strong. They're strong in mind. They're strong in body. Israel is the example for the world. Israel exemplifies everything that is good in a person: strength, beauty, resilience, heart, soul, body, mind, brains, you name it. Israel is it. And at the end of the day, the naysayers are jealous of that. They can't stand the fact that a tiny little sliver of a country flourished in a matter of a few decades and became this monstrosity that's, a world, force to be reckoned with. And the military itself, to me, that's all you need to see. You just look at the military in Israel, look at the strength, look at the force, look at the intel departments, and for such a tiny little country to be able to accomplish that, anyone can do it. If any of us can do it, and any of us should do it, we should adopt that mentality. And moreover, we should support the hell out of Israel. No matter what you do in this world, you support Israel. Because I'll tell you, when the shit hits the fan, where are you going? Where are you going to go as a Jew to be protected? You're going to Israel.
Right now, back to France, not to Germany, not to South America. You go to Israel. Absolutely.
No. So if you don't support the country that's going to support you in your time and hour of need, then, you're a hypocrite.
And it's true. And it's so great to see when Israel, the IDF, right? The Israel Defense Army, like many people don't know, like the ones who hate Israel, they're like, oh, Israel's our aggressor, this, that, and everything else. No, it's usually a defensive army, but it was so refreshing to see Israel in Operation Breaking Dawn go on the offense.
Yeah.
And we saw the ramifications, not only in the immediate neighborhood, but also throughout the Middle East. Suddenly terrorists were retreating. We saw what happened in Syria. The IDF went in and just blazed the shit out of all these weapons caches on top of what they did through Operation Breaking Dawn. I mean, they near decimated the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, right? So and it's great to see that. And that shows Jews in the diaspora. Oh, so that's what it looks like when Jews strike first, when they're on the offense. But on the other hand, what role can and should Israel, if they're able to legally or internationally, actually go into the countries of need, right? So, the horrific accident that happened in Miami, in Surfside, the Miami area with building collapse. Israel sent their rescue mission and, truly aided the American rescuers, right? And even the Americans said, oh, we couldn't have done this without Israel, without the Israeli help. What can, if anything, Israel do, let's say, to send a delegation, even not a military one, but something between diplomatic and military to protect, let's say, a Jewish community in France, or to work with the Shomrim equivalent in France, or any other hotspot of Jew hatred around the world? Are they even able to do that?
I mean, that's a very touchy subject because you're going into someone else's turf, so to speak. The French army wouldn't really look, highly on that. They were kindly on that, rather. I think the best thing that the Israeli military can do is lead by example, the way they have been. And it's our job, to see that example and learn from it and practice it. Listen, you can't bang a person on the head to teach them something.
Right.
Eventually they're going to have to wake up, look around and say, I need to change things. I need to do something differently. If you have to keep banging a person on the head and saying, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up. I mean, that person, in my opinion, he just doesn't want to see it. Because anybody worth their salt sees it, says, yeah, I recognize what's going on and I feel it. And Holocaust survivors that I've spoken to have told me many times that these are the same signs they saw in Nazi Germany. And We need to do something about it, and we need to be proactive about it. And again, Israel is the example. And listen, the truth is, it just shows the Jewish heart again, because Israel, like you said, has the ability to decimate immediately. You know, in the blink of an eye, they can destroy nations, and they don't. It's restraint, and it goes back to our Bible. You know, we defend, we don't attack. But surely, if they're attacked, watch out, because that's not going to be a good day for them. You know, if they attack Israel, they're going to have issues. That's all I can say.
And you're right about the restraints. So one of my friends who served in the IAF, he said, you know, technically on my lunch break, we all could go to Gaza, level Gaza in half an hour, go back and have dinner. But we don't do that, right? Because we, you know, don't want to have a discriminate killing. We know the stakes of that, right? Like, so, you know, obviously being Jews, we would never do that. So yeah, like but it's having that balance, right? Like how do we keep our people safe? How do we protect even our enemies? And we see what the IDF does. It has these knock bombs, right? It'll just bomb a little bit of the top building, but only after the IDF warns everyone to get out.
Right.
And get out. The only reason they don't is because they're used as human shields. So when the world, you know, hears about, oh, you know, this child, you know, died at the hands of the IDF, it didn't. It died at the hands of terrorists. Because
it died at the hands of their parents.
Right, who are terrorists, who did not want to evacuate for propaganda purposes, essentially.
Right.
So, yeah, but then on the other hand, right, because you can take two sides of this argument. So I'm sure there are also Jews in America who say, well, if it ever gets bad enough here for a certain demographic of Jews, you can always go to Israel, right? So I feel like having Israel, it's obviously, you know, like, well, Israel has always been here. Having a liberated, strong Israel, it's incredible, right? It's powerful. But on the other hand, I feel like it also provides some Jews with a false sense of safety who live here. And again, it's that disconnect, right? So I think it all goes back to what, you know, you and I were talking about. Once we see ourselves as part of an actual people or race, like a tribe, that's when things I think will start to kick in more. And that's what
I agree.
Speaking of tribe and overcoming Jewish victimhood, so I noticed that you have very powerful Jewish symbols on your body. And I did a post on Facebook earlier today, and you actually were an inspiration to that. It was your tattoo that you showed me off record. And also, I was just thinking about my own tattoo journey. So I don't have any tats, but for years I've been thinking about having a tattoo, Israel High in Hebrew lettering. And so one of my friends said, oh, just go downtown to the Lower East Side, get a tattoo. Like, what are you waiting for? And so to me, it would be much more special to go to Jerusalem, you know, the heart of the Jewish people, my most favorite city in the world, and get it done by a Jewish artist there, because it has so much significance. And when I was first thinking about it, I was telling people, you know, who are Jewish, and like, oh, you know, Jews can't get tattoos. What are you doing? And I had read in an article how the most famous Jews back in the day in New York City, or the most famous tattoo artists back in the day in New York City, I think it was the 50s and 60s, were Jews themselves. And two of them happened to be observant. And I still was kind of thinking, oh, you know, I don't know. I don't see a lot of Jews with tattoos here. This was about a decade ago. And then I went to Israel in 2015. My first time as an adult being in Israel since 1995 for my bat mitzvah. And I saw all these Israeli Jews with tattoos. I'm thinking, what is going on here? So I asked one of them and I said, can you, like, did the rules change? And he laughed and he said, no, it's just that a lot of us are doing to take back, and he literally said to take back the victimhood, right? Because he said 80 years or near 80 years ago, my grandparents were tattooed forcefully, you know, by the Nazis as if they were animals. And I'm tattooing myself these days as a symbol of power, with Jewish symbols of power. And that just switched my entire mentality on tattoos, right? Because before I became Zionist, I was actually repulsed by tattoos. then I started, thinking of it, but I still wasn't sure. And then that trip just changed my mind. And now every time I go back to Israel, which is a lot more often, thankfully, I see more and more people with tattoos. And even here in America, I know a lot of my friends, I would say half of my Jewish friends have, especially male, have tattoos of some kind. I just think it's so powerful. And to me, it dials into our tribal aspect and just pushing back on this, like, oh, like, Jews are weak and this and this and that. And there's so many elements we spoke about today, but I think that tattoos add to the conversation. So would love to hear your journey with tattooing and what it means to you.
I personally feel like, yeah, it's an FU to those who forcibly tattooed our people. I just also believe that, I just love the way they look. But to me, if you're just going to go and indiscriminately tattoo yourself, I don't think you're doing yourself justice, because everyone should mean something, on a profound level to you. Every one of them should mean something. Every one of my tattoos, any wording is Hebrew, and every symbol is based on Judaism. And I've got one for the Holocaust on my back. I've got Magen David's all over me. I've got the Lion of Judah standing over Israel on my forearm, saying Am Yisrael Chai. My mother's name in Hebrew, Ima on one arm, Abba on the other arm. So to me, that's what it means. It's personal. It connects me with my family. Although, I understand that, out of the 613 mitzvot, I'm, basically breaking one of them. But I mean, listen, the whole myth behind you'll never be buried in a Jewish cemetery is just that. It's a myth. And a very, very close friend of mine who's a rabbi said to me, I feel like it was some booby who said it, who made up that story so her grandson wouldn't get tattooed. And I said, so I knew because I've personally buried many friends who have, tattoos, and it's never been an issue. And, or I hear things like, well, okay, they can be buried, but they have to be buried in a non-religious part. It's like, buddy, if you belong to a religious section of the community, that's where you're being buried, period. So it's just a myth, that's it.
And I think it's hypocritical also because, we were talking about this offline, and I mentioned in my post, I mean, some Jewish women get, breast augmentations, and there's
earrings.
And I see religious women out there with I only have one piercing. I have no, want to have more than that, but I saw a religious woman with 4 piercings in her ear, and I'm thinking, wait, that's allowed?
So there's two schools of thought on that. Okay, so you can say that you're supposed to go out of this world the way you came in, you're not supposed to modify your body. But the actual law, the actual halacha in the Torah says you're not allowed to mark up your body. You're not allowed to write up your body. So it does say that. But again, okay, so I'm breaking one of the halachas. I mean,
yeah, and what are they going to do? Like, not bury like all those Jews in Israel who have tattoos? And it's also cultural, right? So I do know that, 100 years ago, the only people who were getting tattoos were criminals, right? Like, or Navy personnel, back in the day. But now there's this massive shift of meaningful, like you said, tattoos. And no one I know anymore. I'm like, of course, like I'm dating myself, but, like 25 years ago, when I was in high school, girls were out getting so-called tramp stamps, like a night of drunken revelry would end up looking a little heart tattoo on the lower back or a butterfly tattoo. I don't see any of that these days, especially amongst my Jewish friends. All of them have absolute symbolism to why they're getting tattoos. And all of them have Jewish symbols on them. Like maybe they'll have, another one that's not Jewish, but at least one of their tattoos, if they're multi-tatted, will have something of significance to the Jewish people.
Listen, it's become a way of expression. To what if you're expressing your grief, your faith, your happiness, whatever you're expressing it through art on your body. And I personally don't think that, there's really anything wrong with it as long as it's done with the right, tact, and it's tasteful. And, I'm not personally a fan of head to toe tattoos.
Yeah, I'm not
I'm just
tattoos. You scare me.
Or anything on the face. I'm not a fan. So, but that's
we're trying
me.
not to look like criminals. But you're right. Is
Right.
that having a Jewish tattoo, like how you and I were talking offline, how if we're ever in Israel at the same time, because you're so much more experienced with tattoos than I am, like you would take me to like a tattoo shop and be there, with me. But for moral support. But I'm thinking that, to me, that one of the reasons I want to have that, especially in Hebrew lettering, that's the ultimate show of pride to the world, right? Like, I have a Magen David necklace, I have a Hamsa necklace. Am I wearing it right now? No, right? Because it doesn't match with my outfit. And how many times do I not wear it out? But you can't just take off the tattoo. It's there for the world to see. So when you have, your sleeves and you go out, people immediately see that you're a Jew and you're proud to be Jewish.
I was on my Harley with some friends the other day, and we were in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood. And we went into a coffee shop to get something to eat. And my tattoos were in full view. And, I ended up talking with another person who was Muslim because he had a tattoo on his legs. And we were talking back and forth about the tattooing and whatever. And he saw mine. He knew exactly who I was. And it was cool. It was no big deal. It was something where we found common ground and something to talk about. So if for no other reason, that was a good thing,
Exactly. And I know that in Islam, you can't get tattooed either. So maybe they're having some kind of cultural shift as well. You never know. But I think it's something that we need to discuss. And maybe it's a generational thing. Like, I don't know any Jews of our generations that are against it. I mean, some maybe not like it, but they're not vehemently against it. But when I posted it, I definitely had remarks from a lot of older Jews who were just almost apoplectic about the fact that I'm posting these meaningful Jewish tattoos. So it's something, to keep in the forefront. And it's another ingredient to add to Jewish pride, I would say, right? Out of all of the assortment of Jewish pride aspects that we can have, for ourselves and to showcase the world. So I would be remiss if we ended the conversation by not mentioning your book. So if you have a copy, I would love to share with our viewers. And if you can tell us a little bit about the book as well.
So it's basically called Hate 2.0, One Man's Journey to Becoming a Tough Jew. And it speaks specifically to what the term tough Jew means, or rather what it means to me. And it's something where you don't have to be physically tough specifically. Like we mentioned, mentally, spiritually, emotionally tough. Willing to stand up for your community when you're called upon. Like we saw with this video that I was discussing earlier, where the person's being beat up and other people are standing around watching. That's not what I would consider a tough Jew. Every one of them that stood around was failing in their, in their behavior and their responsibilities. They were failing and they were breaking the laws of the Torah. So I discuss my growing up, how I grew up, how I learned how to fight, my first glimpses at antisemitism, and basically I take people through that journey, how I became an activist on the global stage, how somebody who is so unlikely to become an activist became an activist, because I believe it was always in my DNA. It was just something that I had to figure out, that this is my path. Like we all have to figure out our paths. So the book dives deep into that, and it dives into my current activism work, my work in and around the Jewish community, both at home and abroad. And I go into the importance of Israel. I believe I touched upon a lot of very important things. When I say touched upon, I touched upon them. The next book will go further in depth. And so I hope everybody who got it is, enjoying it. I know your copy is going to be en route this week, and I just pray that I did, our community justice and my family and friends justice in writing it, and that everybody enjoys it. It's available on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle formats. We'll be recording the audio version this week, and we're in discussions to translate it into Hebrew, Spanish, and French later on. So, God willing, it takes off, and it inspires people, which is why I wrote it. It's the only real reason I wrote it was to inspire people. So I hope that I achieve that.
Well, if your book is half of what your work entails and the conversations you have, it definitely will. And I'm very much looking forward to getting my copy and reading it. And of course, we'll provide a link to the book when we post this episode. So I wish you lots of luck with the book, and I know that we're going to benefit from what you wrote. So thank you so much. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. And I hope that our viewers get a sense of even more Jewish pride and stepping away from the victimization role that, either
Amen.
forced upon us or that we participate in, and looking at that issue a lot more critically as well. And then for those viewers who may not be Jewish, to understand the dialogue that is happening within the Jewish community.
Yeah, I agree. And it was a great conversation as always. I appreciate you having me on. And I applaud the work that you do as well, and I'll always support it. And I'm here to help in any way I can. And like I always say, I'm Yisrael Chai, man. That's it.
I'm Israel Chai. Thank you so much. Everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Take care.